Let's start with this government shutdown. Can you explain it sort of for a fifth grader, not for a Berkeley undergrad? Because we're faced with this time and time and again, and I mean, just give us a really quick civics lesson about why this keeps happening.
Well, the civics lessons, the superficial is that the Congress and the president have to agree uh, on a spending measure to keep the government funded. And this goes back to the Constitution. I mean, Congress is the funding source for the government. But when you have two parties at loggerheads, and one party is the president's party and doesn't believe in government and really doesn't believe that we should have health care, doesn't believe that we should have the kind of freedoms we do have. The other party, if it's a minority in Congress, doesn't have much leverage, and therein lies the big story. And I
Well, in
wish.
fact, Mark Warner tweeted, I'm sure you might have seen it. He tweeted today, I'm from Virginia, so he's my senator. Republican White House, Republican Senate, Republican House of Representatives, Republican shutdown. Having said that, there are two separate narratives, as is so often the case, Bob, in our current culture and in this country. The one narrative that the Republicans are perpetrating is that this bill or that the Democrats are want to spend money on undocumented immigrants and on health care. Democrats are saying, whoa, 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 wait a minute. Obamacare premiums or the Obamacare is going to run out. Health care is going to increase. How many people? I mean, millions of people, as many as 4 million. Or sorry, how many people will be losing Medicaid? 20. I mean, healthcare prices will go up for 22 million, 4 million people over the next decade will lose health care. So we've got these two competing narratives, Bob. And it seems to me it depends on who you're listening to and what you're watching and what you're reading as to who you are to believe.
Well, Katie, it also depends on the facts, I hope. And the
Yes, I
facts
hope it
are,
does too. And that's why you're here.
okay, the facts are that if you are here in the United States illegally, if you're an undocumented worker, for example, you cannot get Medicaid. You are not eligible for Medicare. You're not eligible for the Affordable Care Act. You just simply can't get it. You don't have you don't have a Social Security number. You don't have anything that is required by government to be able to get these programs. The other fact that's really important is that the big, beautiful bill, which I call the big, ugly bill, that passed in July, cut Medicaid and cut the Affordable Care Act dramatically. Not a single Senate Democrat voted for that bill. That bill was squeezed through the Senate on an arcane process called reconciliation. And a lot of Democrats said, well, if you just got that, squeeze that through 51-50, with J.D. Vance casting the vote, the tie-breaking vote, that doesn't reflect our values, and it doesn't reflect the values of most Americans. And our values, and most Americans say, we don't want to cut Medicaid, and we don't want to cut the Affordable Care Act. And if you do that, if you do make those cuts, then starting next year, the premiums, healthcare premiums for 24 million people will soar so high that many of those people, most of those people, will not be able to afford any health insurance at all. That's the reality, Katie. That is the reality. That's what the fight here is over a fundamental, basic issue, and that is the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid are the things that we took for granted in terms of health care and health benefits. Are they going to be available to 24 million Americans? And I say, of course they should be. Of course they should be. And the Democrats now have a little bit of leverage, finally, and the Democrats ought to be doing exactly what they're doing, holding out, hold out. Don't agree to this, to continue the government with this horrible, big, bad, ugly bill
Well,
as part
you
of
know,
your the government that you're continuing.
But Bob, to my point about how competing narratives, someone just wrote on our conversation, they shouldn't be able to get Medicare if they're not citizens. I think people don't understand that they can't.
They can't. They cannot get it. They cannot. Can we just be clear? They can't get Social Security. They can't get Medicare. They can't get the Affordable Care Act. Uh, they may, if they are working in the United States, many of them are paying in to Medicare and all of the Medicaid, but they can't get Medicare or Medicaid out. They are ineligible, period.
Why do you think that this has so much, not with everyone, obviously, but why do you think that perpetrating this and this sort of myth of Medicaid and Medicare, Bob, is penetrating the American psyche, and that the Republicans are being quite effective at at kind of delivering at this misinformation and having it be believed?
Well, they're very effective at lying, Katie, and that's been true even before Trump. I remember the death tax. They talked about, if you raise the capital gains taxes, or if you have a large, not a large, if you have a tax that is an estate tax when you die, and even though it applies to a tiny, tiny number of Americans who are extraordinarily wealthy, they called it the death tax, and they said you shouldn't penalize death. Well, they do that. They know how to do that, and I guess Democrats don't really know how to lie effectively. Democrats should not be lying effectively. I think one of the biggest kind of asymmetries between the two parties is that you have one party, the Republicans, not only lying, but also they don't believe in government and they don't believe in democracy, many of them. And you have another party with Democrats who think that it's their responsibility to tell the truth most of the time, and also to uphold the government and democracy and the Constitution. And that is a fundamental asymmetry.
You heard what Senator Mark Warner tweeted. Uh, obviously, the Affordable Care Act and not having paying skyrocketing healthcare premiums is popular with most Americans. So, do you think that the Republicans will be blamed for this shutdown, or what kind of impact will it have on how people perceive the Democratic Party?
Well, if the Democrats hold out and they make a big enough stink and they say, we are not going to buy on to letting the government continue if the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid are going to be attacked and cut by the Republicans, and they make that clear over and over and over and over again, I think there's a very good chance that Trump and the Republicans will be blamed. And the other point here is that uh, again, as you said, Katie, Trump and the Republicans own the government. They run the Senate, they run the House, they run the executive branch. For all intents and purposes, they run the Supreme Court. I mean, this is their government, and if anybody's going to be blamed, of course it should be them.
What are the real world implications, Bob, of a government shutdown? What happens in terms of uh, salaries, in terms of benefits, in terms of sort of how the government operates?
Well, I've been involved in two shutdowns. When I was Secretary of Labor, we had a very big shutdown. I can tell you it's traumatic for the government employees who are being furloughed. A lot of government employees, even those who have to work, are not being paid. I remember as Secretary of Labor trying to console employees who were saying to me with tears in their eyes, how am I going to pay my bills? I mean, I joined the government because I believed in what we were doing. So that's one big, big ongoing problem and issue. Also, a lot of Americans are not going to get the services and benefits that they thought they were going to receive. Uh, and whether you're talking about national parks being open or museums being open, or you're talking about, Social Security checks will still come through, but they may be delayed. And if you have a problem applying for Social Security, it may be hard for you to actually get the application through and processed. But a lot of other things we take for granted are not going to be there. And, air traffic controllers will be working, but they're not going to be paid. And a lot of people in the armed services are going to be working. They may not be paid.
That's right. A lot of military families, who may be living paycheck to paycheck won't, they'll get the amount of money after the government reopens, but it's going to be a big hardship for many people.
And remember, we've had now since 1990, we've had 8 shutdowns. 4 of them have been under Donald Trump.
Wow. We know already, Bob, that Donald Trump is not a big fan of the federal workforce, given what he did almost immediately after he came into office. Do you think he's going to use this as an excuse to just for the wholesale firing of many federal workers and getting rid of a lot of government agencies? Or is he able, can he do that?
Well, he's already been doing it, Katie. I
Well,
think
I know, but I mean, can he use this as an excuse to do more of it?
of course, he's going to use it as an excuse to do more of it. But you get to a point where there are real dangers in not having government workers protecting people, consumers from fraud, from corporate fraud. Not having government workers or agencies that are protecting the environment. One of the big problems in that big ugly bill was that you have a tremendous, a kind of almost a lot. I mean, a lot of the environmental protections that we take for granted, again, uh, ending in that big ugly bill, but even more are being cut every day by the administration. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau almost eliminated, USAID eliminated. Now, the Congress didn't do any of these things. It was done by the Trump administration, by Elon Musk and his Doge, and now by Russell Vought and his OMB. This is not what our democracy is about. Our democracy is about we want something, we need something. Congress passes money, engineers it, and so Congress makes the decisions based on the people. This is Article 1 of the Constitution. It's the people. Congress is supposed to be the people's house.
And they have obviously the power of the purse. But now I guess the Trump White House is attempting to reallocate funds that have already been allocated by Congress and that the president has signed or that it's, gotten executive approval, if you will. And I was talking to David Frum this morning. You probably know David from The Atlantic and from your years in politics. And, he was saying that Richard Nixon tried to do this, but the Supreme Court stopped him because he basically said the Constitution doesn't say I can't do it, right? It doesn't say I can do it, but it doesn't say I can't do it. So, is it possible that this will go to the Supreme Court too?
Yes, it is. In fact, it is heading to the Supreme Court. They're called impoundments. It was, and Congress passed a law right after Nixon saying you cannot impound if you're the executive. You can't just impound funds that Congress has appropriated. It went to the Supreme Court one time shortly after it was enacted, and the Supreme Court said, yes, that is constitutional. Congress can stop that kind of impoundment. And impoundments, therefore, it's reasonable to assume that impoundments are unconstitutional. Well, it's going to go back to the Supreme Court. Will this Supreme Court uphold what the previous Supreme Court did? There's no guarantee. And the Supreme Court has been very, very willing to support Donald Trump in all sorts of ways. But we will see. I mean, Katie, it does bring up this basic question about a government shutdown. In some ways, to some extent, the government is already shut down. That is, if you define a shutdown as the executive's ability to decide not to spend any money or not to spend money on what the president doesn't like, or to shift money to what the president does like from what the president doesn't like, well, that's effectively a shutdown.
So, yeah, well, You're right. And can anything be done about that? I mean, I guess because of the Republican controlled Congress, they can't really push back on that.
No, and this is why I think that everything we're experiencing now has got to be understood in light of the upcoming midterm elections in next November. Because if, for example, uh, come January, 24 million Americans lose their health insurance because they can't possibly afford health insurance, given what has happened to the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid because of Trump and the Republicans. They are going to be understandably, justifiably pretty upset. And they're going to take it out on Trump and the Republicans, I assume, in the midterm elections. A lot of other Americans who don't like the fact that, for example, ICE immigration agents are coming to their neighborhoods and arresting people, some of whom are Americans who have been here and are here legally, not illegally, but are here legally.
And given
And
absolutely zero due process, right, Bob?
well, there's no due process. I mean, due process stands for a simple proposition. You can't be arrested and put in prison without some neutral judge looking and seeing that the reasons are valid. And it's happening right now. And there's a lot of racial profiling going on. ICE agents are targeting people who look Latino. And that is against not only against the law and the Constitution, but it's against everything we believe in this country. So for that reason, also, I believe that the midterm elections will swing toward uh, the Democrats away from Republicans, and Democrats will retake both houses of Congress.
That's your prediction. But what about this whole notion of redistricting? I talked to Tim Miller of the Bulwark, and he said he thought redistricting in all these red states would ultimately work to the Republicans' advantage. This very unusual mid decade prior to the census coming out, just because the president is asking these states to redistrict and to change, to get rid of Democratic seats. So they won't take a shellacking, as they say, in the midterm elections, that it's actually going to work in favor of the Republicans. How concerned are you about that?
Well, I'm somewhat concerned. Here in California, we are trying to fight back against particularly Texas's redistricting that provided what looks like 5 additional Republican seats. And so we in California are redistricting temporarily, just to balance things and create 5 more Democratic seats. The notion is that you want to take away any incentive on the part of red state governors and red state legislators to redistrict in ways that really distort even further our democracy.
But
Not, and this is not a race to the bottom. I think that that's an important distinction. If blue state governors and legislatures are counterbalancing what red state governors and legislatures are doing and stopping what they are doing. That is not creating a race to the bottom. That is simply preserving our democracy as it is.
But Bob, doesn't that assume that there are enough blue states to counterbalance what these red states are doing? I haven't checked my latest numbers or my latest states, but states like Indiana and there are a bunch of others are redistricting as well. And I talked to Kathy Hochul. I sound like I'm such a name dropper. I'm just interviewing as many people as I can about stuff. But Kathy Hochul said New York can't do it because it's against the state constitution. So will all these blue states be able to counterbalance what all these red states are doing ultimately?
Well, they're going to try. I mean, I know people in Pennsylvania and in Massachusetts and in other blue states with blue state governors and blue state legislatures. They are going to try. But again, I want to emphasize what they're going to try to do is counterbalance
Right,
what
but are
is
they going to be able to is my question. Is Are they going to have the numbers to really to where this is going to work and it's not going to give Republicans a huge advantage in the midterms?
not going to be a huge advantage in any event, Katie. It may, at worst comes to worst, be an advantage, some little advantage to the Republicans in the midterms. But again, I think what we are seeing and we will see is a great tsunami, a great wave of independents and and obviously Democrats, but also many Republicans who say this is not the government we wanted. This is not what we bargained for when we voted in the last election. We've got to at least make sure that there is some set of counterbalances in place in Congress, some guardrails. Otherwise, we are going to lose our democracy completely.
Getting back to the shutdown, I know 89% of the EPA has been furloughed, but many of the department's employees are being told that they need to keep working on projects that are still receiving funding. What, I mean, can you tell me what this looks like in practice?
Well, in practice, it means that many people and many families, and you alluded to this a little while ago, 70% of American families are working paycheck to paycheck. Now, in the government, there's no reason to believe that government families are any different in terms of the ratio, the number of people, the percentage that are working paycheck to paycheck. You have a lot of families who are not being paid and will not be paid, and they don't know when the shutdown will be over. They are being asked to continue to work without pay. Many of them are willing to do it, and many of them fear that they will lose their jobs if they don't do that. But on the other hand, the hardship could be very, very great. If we get into 2 or 3 or 5 weeks of this, can you imagine how difficult it will be for many of these families to make ends meet?
A lot of my followers wanted to know why members of Congress are going to still get paid uh, or get a paycheck when so many other people won't.
You want? I don't think they should. I mean, I don't think members of Congress. I don't think anybody in the executive branch. I don't think the president or any of his assistants or Russell Vogt or any of them should get any paycheck during this government shutdown.
Let's talk about ICE and the impact it's having on economies. Obviously, the sort of the moral issues of ripping people away from their families without due process, the aforementioned racial profiling are reasons why people are really upset about these ICE raids, except for some people who seem to be cheering them on, but they feel uh, so menacing to say the least. Can you talk about the impact these ICE raids are having on the economy?
They are having a huge negative effect on the economy, Katie. Now, we don't know, and we don't have enough data to know exactly the effect of the ICE raids and how many people are just so frightened that they're not going to work or they are leaving the country, versus another big drag on the economy, which is the tariffs and how much each one is contributing to a very dramatic slowdown in hiring. What worries me is that the economy seems to be slipping toward recession. There is almost no hiring going on. And I mean, after all, if you're an employer and you are trying to predict the future, which you have to do if you're hiring, if you hire people, you are hiring on the basis of your predictions that you're going to need additional help in the future. Well, if you don't know what the administration is going to be doing about tariffs, and if you don't know how many people you're going to be able to keep or hire in terms of your workforce that you already have, if you don't know how many consumers in your town are going to be able to come and buy things that you are providing because they are scared, because their money is running out, because they are afraid of ICE raids, because they're losing their government jobs, whatever it is, you are not going to hire, and you are also going to be not only part of the problem, but you are going to be part of an economy that is heading toward recession. And there's I don't want to get too technical about this, but we're now in between both inflation because of the prices going up, particularly food prices, and recession because of almost no jobs being created. When you have those two together, it's kind of it's kind of dreaded what's called stagflation. The problem with stagflation is that the Federal Reserve Board really doesn't know what to do. It doesn't have any tools. It can't fight inflation and recession at the same time.
I haven't talked to you in a long time, so I'm so happy to see you and touch.
Am I hearing you up, Katie?
You're not hearing me well? Can you
I'm
hear
hearing
me?
you. I said I'm fear that I'm not really cheering you up. These are not.
Oh, you're not cheering me up. I thought you said you weren't hearing me. I can't hear it myself. But um, I'm just curious. You've watched all of this unfold. It's only been, God, what has it been? 9 months? About a little over 9 months. And, as you've watched this administration um do all sorts of things, Bob, I'm just curious how you're I mean, what do you think of everything that's going on in this country?
Well, one thing we haven't talked about that I'm very concerned about is the targeting of political opponents, like James Comey, using the Justice Department as a weapon. This again, it runs counter to every tradition, every value we have in this country. After Richard Nixon did that, made used his enemies list and used the Justice Department as a kind of way of getting at his enemies, we put some controls in place, some rules in place, so that presidents could not do this. But Donald Trump is wrecking every norm we have. And our democracy is seriously endangered. When you have ICE agents uh, who are arresting Americans without any due process, when you have a major cuts in the federal budget that people want and need, programs like Medicaid and uh, and the Affordable Care Act, and you have on top of all of that the weaponization, the politicization of the Justice Department. You have a situation that doesn't resemble a democracy. You and I have talked for years about America, about our government. I've written, I don't know how many books that people have never read um, about the government and our democracy, but we are really in a crisis right now of democracy, a crisis that is not just a government shutdown crisis. It's so much deeper and broader than that.
Well, let me ask you about the get just gosh, there's so much I want to talk to you about. I'm talking to Charlie Sykes about what happened in Quantico, Virginia yesterday, which was so bizarre. As somebody who's covered the Pentagon early in my career, what's happening there is so surreal and so bizarre. Um, well, let me just ask you real quickly what you thought of that.
I thought it was surreal and bizarre are two adjectives that I definitely would use. But in addition, when the president of the United States talks to the top 800 or 850 military commanders in one place and says to them, I'm going to ask many of you to go into American cities and counter the enemy within. The enemy within. What is the enemy within? Who are the enemies within? He's talking about Americans who he disagrees with into cities that are traditionally Democratic cities or have Democratic mayors. That also is a move toward an authoritarian regime. It's a move against democracy. It could be intended in the midterm elections. We were talking about the midterms a moment ago to intimidate people from in democratic cities from voting their conscience, from even going to vote. Uh, I just, we have to remind ourselves that the person sitting in the Oval Office is the same person who denied that the 2020 elections were fair, who has convinced many Americans that they were not fair, that the election in 2020 was stolen from him without any basis in fact, when even his own attorney general said he was wrong, and then had some part to play. And we can debate how much of a part to play, but he had some part to play in encouraging an attack on the Capitol on January 6th, 2021. This is the same person who is now president of the United States. So I worry about this country, Katie. I worry because I have friends and relatives who are Trump supporters. I go out of my way to talk to Trump supporters. Whenever I'm invited by a university that has a conservative group that wants me to come and speak, I come and speak to them. But I've never seen this degree of suspicion and anger and distrust and polarization in this country.
I hear you, and I guess the question is, I mean, there's a litany of things, and then of course he pardoned everyone who from January 6th. I mean, we could spend a lot of time, Bob, talking about all the things this president has done and all the things this administration continues to want to do. But I guess when you talk to these people, when you talk to the Trump supporters, and you know, it's there's no really persuading so many of them that this man is really dangerous. And
Yeah,
I'm curious, I mean, why?
well, here's what I get from my many conversations with Trump supporters. They tell me that they feel that they've been on the losing end of a system for years and years, that the system has been rigged against them by, and they say it's coastal elites. They think that they are looked down upon by people of college educations. They feel that the people in New York and Washington and Los Angeles and San Francisco really don't represent their values. They feel that for the first time they're being heard. Now, when I say back to them, but what has he actually done for you? He's passed a huge tax cut for mostly benefits the wealthy. What has he done for you? And they say to me, well, he's acting tough, and he's acting tough on behalf of my values. Uh, I don't know how to respond to that. I think it'll take years for America to come back together. I'm going to do whatever I can. I'm sure you're going to do whatever you can. And many people who are watching us will do whatever they can, because mending what has happened, overcoming this rift, making sure that our conceptions of justice and of democracy and of the rule of law are dominant and are agreed to, it seems to me is more important than anything else we can possibly do.
But it's also not, it does seem to me totally incongruous with what the Trump administration is trying to do, because this attitude of divide and conquer is straight out of the authoritarians' playbook, as you said earlier. So they're sowing division. They do not want unity. They want us to, he keeps talking about, as you mentioned, the enemy within. They are trying to, hurt us. I hate my opponents. I mean, it is all the language of division. So it's very hard to kind of fight that and to reach across the aisle when his followers are being encouraged to hate the other side. And I think the response from the other side is to hate them right back.
And it can't be. I mean, in terms of the religious traditions that we hold dear, in terms of our own patriotism and views of citizenship, we've got to avoid hating each other. We can't make each other the enemy. And the other point here, Katie, is that, and I can't help thinking this, that you've got a new billionaire class in America who really doesn't mind, and maybe even encourages with a nod and a wink, Americans dividing and hating each other, so that we don't look up and see where all the wealth and power really have gone in this country.
Well, Bob, you didn't make me feel any better. But
Well, look, I heard somebody a couple of days ago say to me, when I said to them, "How are you doing?" They said, "On the macro, terrible. On the micro, I'm doing well." And I think that many people feel that way. I mean, if you look out at the big picture, it just looks worse and worse. If you look at just your own circumstance, your own family, your own community, people are struggling. But they they're doing fairly well.
A lot of my friends are, I hear that too, macro and micro. But for a lot of people I know, the macro is really affecting the micro. And it's creating huge anxiety and upset and a feeling of hopelessness, powerlessness, feeling overwhelmed, really, truly, really, really worried about the future of our country.
And stressed and depressed. Here's what I tell people who tell me that I'm feeling stressed and depressed. I say to them honestly that the best antidote to feeling stressed and depressed by everything that's going on is activism. Activism. I don't care whether it's very tiny steps you're taking, writing to your member of Congress or calling your members of Congress, or it's demonstrating, or it is boycotting companies that you think are doing too much, surrendering to this administration, or doing bigger things. Whatever you're doing, if it's activist, if you are actually doing things that honor the values that we hold dear, people feel better. That overcomes their sense of powerlessness and peril and kind of despair. Um, Activism is the best antidote for despair.
Well, that's a good place to end. I hope that we can do this again soon. I've always liked you so much and admired you so much, Bob. So maybe we can have a conversation like this on a regular basis.
I would love that, Katie. Thank you. And the feeling is mutual.